Welcome back to another video. In this video series, I want to delve into understanding Active Directory Federation services. So this part one is going to be an introduction, and we're probably going to have three other parts where we actually conclude a lab and make ADFS work in a lab. So let's dive in. Basically, what is ADFS? Well, ADFS is a Federated Identity Management Solution. That's a lot to say. It's a mouthful. But what it does is it allows us to provide single sign-on for an application, meaning that once you've signed into your workstation, we can then use those credentials that, not so much the credentials, but the claim that you've already been authenticated with third-party applications. So it sends a claim to the web application in behalf of Active Directory rather than sending your actual credentials. And I'm going to explain that a little bit further. What ADFS helps us do is to support web service interoperability between these various vendors that have come onto market. And I'm talking about cloud resources, everything from Gmail to Office 365, but it could be as simple as your payroll system. So why do we need ADFS? Let's say we're going to skip this whole video series and say, you know what, I'm not going to use ADFS. Well, if you go out and get a cloud resource, you know, some kind of provider, then the provider might say, well, if you're not going to use ADFS, let's create a VPN tunnel back to your premise and then trust our domain to your Active Directory domain. And nobody wants to do this because, one, there's a tremendous amount of setup, and two, there are security implications. So let's explore another alternative. Another alternative, and I've employed this throughout my years, is the constant exporting of CSV or XML documents from your domain to the cloud resource. And although this kind of sounds like, hey, you know what, this is the easy way out, it's not, because when certain data changes in your user domain and it goes over to the cloud resource provider sometimes has conflicts with the information. And an example of this is like simply when someone gets married and their name changes, or they're legally changed their name, or let's say, how do you deal with deletions when people leave? So these are all problems, right? Let's talk about another alternative. Another alternative is just complete isolation. We deal with this with, you know, free web services all the time. Your work account username and password probably is not the same as your Gmail, right? And we don't want it to be, of course. But the idea here is that every time you bring out a new service, somebody has to get a new username and a new password for that service. And they have to manage all of these usernames and all of these passwords. And sometimes passwords have different expirations. And it's very, very hard for a user. So let's tough it up. Let's learn ADFS. On the left-hand side, we're going to see the user domain. And on the right-hand side, we're going to see the cloud resource. Now, inside the user domain, of course, we have Active Directory. On the far left, we have an Active Directory Federation server, and in the middle, we have someone logged onto the computer. So what's going to happen is when the person logged onto the computer goes to that web resource or cloud resource, they're going to initially request a login. But when they go to log in, the cloud resource is going to redirect them to ADFS, and the user is going to authenticate against ADFS. When ADFS authenticates that user, it's going to check Active Directory. Active Directory is going to authenticate the user, and a claim in the form of a cookie is going to be handed back to the user, along with a redirection link back to the cloud resource. And the cloud resource will accept this claim and log the user in. Now let me be very clear here. We are not passing the username and the password of the user to the cloud resource. You have already agreed with the cloud resource provider which types of attributes will be included in the claim. It could be last name, it could be first name, it could be username, it could be email address, could be any number of things. It could be all of those things. Now, this is just one type of ADFS implementation. This is probably the most common. This is what we consider SAML 2.0. We're passing a cookie that contains the claim to the cloud resource provider. So when I sat down and wanted to talk to you about ADFS, I said, how could I set up a lab? I've taught this a million times over in the classroom. So I thought to myself, well, what do I need? Well, I'm going to need an Active Directory domain controller. I'm going to need a domain-joined ADFS server, a non-joined client workstation, although it could be joined to the domain, a non-domain joined claims-aware application server, because this would simulate a real-world environment. And I said, well, what else am I going to need? Well, I'm going to need certificates for both the ADFS and the claims-aware application server. I'm going to have to worry about the trust implications, meaning that I'm not using third-party certificates. I'm creating my own. So I said, well, I know I can do this, and I'm just going to need a great deal of patience. And it took me probably about a week or two to come up with the actual lab so that I could actually have you guys participate and learn something in the outcome. And I've put together a really great lab for us. So you're going to say, wow, I'm really excited about ADFS. How can I learn more? Well, there's a free ebook from Microsoft, and I'm going to put it down in the description of the video. And you can download this book for free. It's all about claims-based identity access control. No, I am not paid to tell you that. I found this great resource upon my research for this video. You can also follow and participate in the lab. You can implement ADFS for single sign-on in your production environment. Now, I know that every time I produce a video, somebody posts on a forum or PMs me, hey, I've got this problem with whatever, and I always get back to you if I think it's a lab environment, or I'll do my best to answer it. This is one of those things where I can be contracted to help you with your identity issues for a dollar figure. I like money, but this is not something that I would be able to answer in a forum post or an email. I'd need to have a very deep understanding of your implementation, and the best person that knows that is usually your cloud provider, the person that you're setting this resource up with. So I hope you got something out of this video. Please stay tuned for the next video where we'll actually start discussing the lab and begin building the lab. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below, Google+, Facebook, or Twitter. And as always, I thank you for watching.